epic, and it's inevitable that we fill them in from other tablets. So Gilgamesh is a composite on top of all this, and Gilgamesh's adventures are composited out of lots of tablets of the kind that I've shown you, and we don't have a complete 12-tablet set of Gilgamesh. We don't have a single complete manuscript. Okay? Actually, that's a little bit early. So I'm going to start telling the story at varying levels of detail. Gilgamesh is the ruler of Uruk, and he is supreme, surpassing all other kings, is the first line of the composition in the period of tablet P, Gilgamesh P. He's perfectly formed, he's bigger than everybody else, he's stronger than everybody else, he plays rougher than everybody else. This is a problem. He plays too hard with the men folk. They wrestle and play ball games and he wears them out and they don't come home at night. And he plays too hard with the women folk. And one of the things that Gilgamesh does, apparently, is to practice something which we call the jus prima noctis, the law of the first night, which means that he sleeps with brides before their husbands do. Yeah, oh. The reaction is right, it's appropriate, because some of these things are markers of a king who goes too far, a king who's acting beyond the social pale. And the townsfolk of Uruk appeal to the gods to give them somebody who'll be a match for Gilgamesh. They can't take it anymore. And the gods create Gilgamesh's companion, Enkidu. And Enkidu starts off life as essentially a wild animal. He's anthropomorphic, and he's big and powerful and strong, but he lives with the animals, he drinks with the animals, he's uncivilized. He lives in another dimension. He lives in the uncivilized dimension. And a lot of the Mesopotamian scholarship that I think of when I talk about Gilgamesh, I may not have time to mention it all today, is connected with dimensions and the appropriateness of being in dimensions and the ability to move back and forth between dimensions and the implications of carrying out certain actions in a dimension that you don't belong in. So the townspeople have to get Enkidu into civilization. And they hatch a cunning plan, which is to send a prostitute out to him called Shamhat. The name means something like very lovely. And Shamhat seduces him, and they have sex for 6 days and 7 nights. Just so you know, there are some I'm going to touch and some I'm not. So, after this, Enkidu wants to go back to his wild animals, but he can't. He's lost some of his natural powers. He's lost the ability to interact with the animals. He doesn't belong there anymore. He's tainted by the knowledge of a woman from civilization. So they take him back to the town. They show him bread. He doesn't know what to do with it. They teach him to eat bread and drink beer. He eats the food of the civilized dimension, if you like, and he crosses over. And just after he does that, Gilgamesh is on his way one evening to sleep with a new bride. Enkidu blocks his passage. They wrestle, and they wrestle to a standstill. How many Westerns have you seen that happen in? What happens after you fight to a standstill with somebody? They earn your grudging respect, and you become friends, right? And that's what happens. Okay? So now Gilgamesh and Enkidu are suddenly best friends, and it's a buddy movie. Yeah? So, at this point, the narrative, there are some breaks and inconsistencies between the versions, but basically what happens is that there is some kind of existential angst in play. This is very clear in some of the Sumerian versions of Gilgamesh and Huwawa, where Gilgamesh is sad, and Enkidu says, "Why are you upset?" And Gilgamesh literally says, "Because I went up on the walls of Uruk and I saw the bodies floating past me, and I thought, what is it all for? What's the point of it all?" And the point of it all, Enkidu says in one of these contexts, is that you have to establish some fame. To go and kill something and write about it, set up a monument, a stele, to establish your name. So somehow within this general set of parameters, Gilgamesh and Enkidu hatched the plan of going to the Cedar Mountain, Mount Lebanon, to attack and kill Huwawa. This plan, right from the get-go, has its problems. They know that it's risky. They know that it crosses its own boundaries because Huwawa was put in charge of the cedar forest by Enlil, one of the supreme gods. Enlil is the appointed guardian, the sanctioned guardian. He's there to scare humans so they won't disturb the cedar forest. So despite that, they decide to go, and they go and see Gilgamesh's mother, Ninsun, and Ninsun carries out a ritual in which she prays to Shamash to protect Gilgamesh and Enkidu on their adventures and to help them in battle. And she actually tells Shamash, who is the sun god, seen in here. You can see the nice sun being lowered and raised by the guys on the roof. She persuades Shamash to help them in battle. So everybody knows when this expedition is begun that it's going to be problematic. In the Sumerian version, Gilgamesh takes 50 of his best troops with him, 50 men of Uruk. This is not quite 50 men of Uruk, but this is an early dynastic phalanx from what we call the Stele of the Vultures. So it's a nice image to have as a background. In the standard Babylonian epic, Gilgamesh and Enkidu undertake the trip on their own. And it's a long trip. They travel 20 leagues, they break for lunch, they travel another 30 leagues, and they camp for the night. Every 3 days, they incubate a dream. They build a house of the dream god. And Gilgamesh lies down in this house and sleeps so that he'll have a dream. And every one of the dreams is ominous. They all foretell destruction, doom, failure. And every time, Enkidu says, no, 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 you're misunderstanding. It means this, and puts a positive spin on it. So again, throughout this journey, which doesn't reference much in the way of geography, partly because they're on their way to known terrain. Kings have been going to the Cedar Mountains for hundreds, thousands of years. And partly because that's just not what's of interest here. What's of interest, the focal point, is the problematic nature of the expedition. So, after at least 5 dreams, they stood there marveling at the cedar of Mount Lebanon. And again, now the versions have some differences, but the essence of what happens is that Gilgamesh and Enkidu approach Huwawa to fight him and are initially repelled, intimidated, laid low, depending on the version. Shamash comes to their help. In the standard Babylonian version, he sends his 13 winds, and he blinds Huwawa, and they have Huwawa at their mercy. Now, Huwawa is an interesting character. Huwawa is described in monstrous terms, but as I said already, he's a legitimate monster. He belongs in the cedar forest. It's his dimension. He's not harming anybody while he stays there, and nobody goes to harm him. Okay? This is one representation of Huwawa, again from the British Museum. What this is, in fact, is a model used for divination, or at least I say used for, I'm going to delete that, a model derived from the practices of divination. One of the common forms of divination in Mesopotamia is sacrificial divination. You have a ritual, you address the gods, you kill the animal, you read its insides. One of the things you read is the configuration of its entrails. So if you look carefully, you'll see that this looping tubular structure is a single sequence, and it's actually the entrails of a sheep. And what's written on the back here, amongst other things, says, if the entrails of the sheep look like the face of Huwawa, then it's an omen of whatever. Right? So we know that this is a representation of Huwawa because the back tells us. We don't have to guess. We're pretty sure this is a representation of the heroes killing Huwawa. This is one of several images you'll see from cylinder seals. On the right is the actual seal, and on the left is a rollout. And some of these associations of imagery on the seals are more convincing, and some are less. This is one of the more convincing ones. This is the coup de grace. At the very end of the episode of Huwawa, when Huwawa pleads for mercy, Gilgamesh is tempted to stay his hand. Enkidu says, no, we have to kill him. And Gilgamesh kills him. He kills Enlil's appointed guardian of the cedar forest. This is actually a sacrilege. It's not a great act of heroism. It's problematic. Okay? They cut down cedar trees, they make a door, they put it on a temple, they come back to Uruk, and Gilgamesh, who is so perfect, catches the eye of Ishtar. And on the left here, if you want to imagine what the earliest form of Gilgamesh could possibly have been, this would be it. This is almost certainly a statuette of a ruler from the city of Uruk around 3000 BCE, give or take. And you can see that the musculature on the arms is quite carefully modeled. I'm not saying this actually is Gilgamesh, you understand, but the perfection of the ruler is embodied in Gilgamesh's perfection, and it's Gilgamesh's perfection that attracts Ishtar's gaze, and on the right is an image of Ishtar, and Ishtar invites Gilgamesh to marry her, and Gilgamesh rejects her out of hand. He lists her previous lovers, he taunts her, he's impolite. Again, this is inappropriate. When you deal with Ishtar, you're polite to her for good reasons. And we know this because we have hymns to Ishtar. We know what the kings say to Ishtar. So Gilgamesh doesn't behave to Ishtar in the way that he should. Ishtar is furious at being spurned and goes to her father, An, and says, we need to do something about these two. Send down the bull of heaven to destroy them. So sure enough, the bull of heaven comes down and snorts and stomps and terrifies the townspeople. And there's a big fight between Gilgamesh, Enkidu, and the bull of An. And you can see from this cylinder seal rollout what the result is. Gilgamesh is expertly plunging his sword into the back of the bull's neck or head. The text describes this as the ideal kill point. Gilgamesh is an expert butcher. So firstly, they defeat the bull of heaven, the bull of An. Secondly, when they see that Ishtar is angry about this, they throw pieces of it at her. They disrespect Ishtar seriously. Okay? This is too much. At this point, somebody has to die. And it's not going to be Gilgamesh. So it has to be Enkidu. So Enkidu, in another dream, there are lots and lots of dreams in Gilgamesh, foresees his fate and falls sick, and is sick, the text tells us, for at least 12 days, and then, as happens more than once, there's a break. We lose it. We don't see Enkidu's actual death. The standard Babylonian epic, as preserved, segues into the funeral of Gilgamesh. There is a Sumerian text, sorry, I misspoke there because of what I'm about to say, the funeral of Enkidu. There is a Sumerian text about the death of Gilgamesh. In the Sumerian traditions, the immortality of Gilgamesh is capped by his death. There isn't this, well, we don't, I'm getting myself in trouble here by saying there isn't. We don't have at present, because in this field you can always find something else tomorrow, we don't have extensive tales of his attempts to achieve immortality in the way that we're going to see later. What we have is a composition which describes the sickness of Gilgamesh and his dissatisfaction that he's going to die, and the reassurances of the great things he's achieved, including bringing back knowledge from before the flood, which I'll get back to later. And then, again, the